Hi, my name is Claire Thompson. I'm 31 years old, a senior risk analyst in Atlanta, the kind of person companies trust with their worst-case scenarios, except my own family has never trusted me with anything except their silence. In my parents' house, I was always the backup kid, the strong one, the daughter who didn't need praise, celebration, or even basic kindness, because Claire can handle it. Still, that Thanksgiving night, as I walked back into the cedar-scented house I grew up in, with the smell of roasted turkey in the air, candles flickering along the worn wooden table, and a football game humming on the TV in the background, a small, ridiculous part of me hoped this year might be different. Instead, halfway through dinner, my mother Linda stood up, pointed at me in front of both sides of the family and my sister's future in-laws, and said, clear as crystal, "I wish you were never born." I set my napkin down, looked her straight in the eye, and heard myself answer, almost calmly, "Then consider me dead." I turned, walked toward the front door, and had no idea that one simple step away from that table would blow up a wedding, a church community, and the reputation my parents had spent decades polishing. Before I walk you back through everything that led up to that night and all the chaos that followed, tell me this. Have you ever been made to feel like the expendable child? And where in the world are you listening from right now? I didn't understand the word scapegoat when I was 8 years old, but I understood the feeling. It started the year my mother decided Olivia and I were old enough for our own rooms. Olivia, 2 years younger and already the crown jewel of the family, was ushered into the bright bedroom with the big window overlooking the maple trees. Mom had spent a full weekend painting the walls a soft lavender, hanging little butterfly decals, and arranging her dolls on floating shelves like a boutique display. My room was the former laundry overflow, space narrow, dim, and tucked beside the humming washer and dryer. Mom said it was cozy, though she never once stepped inside long enough to notice how the detergent smells soaked into my clothes or how the machines rattled at night like distant thunder. When I asked why Olivia got the nicer room, Mom didn't miss a beat. "Olivia's sensitive. She needs sunlight. You're strong, Claire. You can handle anything." That phrase, "you can handle anything," became the excuse for every small cruelty that followed. And, for a long time, I believed her. Birthdays were where the contrast sharpened most. Olivia's parties looked like Pinterest boards, neighbors, classmates. Balloons tied to every chair, a 3-layer cake in whatever cartoon theme she was obsessed with that year. Mom wore herself out baking, decorating, orchestrating the perfect photos. My birthdays were quieter affairs, quiet like an empty church. A store-bought sheet cake, usually whatever was on sale. A rushed happy birthday after dinner, and Mom reminding me, as if offering comfort, big girls don't need all that fuss. The worst part wasn't the small celebrations. It was the justification behind them. Every time I wondered aloud why things were so drastically different between my sister and me, Mom responded with the same rehearsed disappointment. "Claire, don't be jealous. It's ugly. Olivia is fragile. She needs more attention. You've always been strong. You don't need everything your sister needs." She said it so many times that I eventually absorbed it as truth, that wanting fairness made me greedy, that wanting affection made me dramatic, that wanting to be treated like a child made me childish. The message, spoken or unspoken, was always the same. Olivia was the treasure. I was the tool. She was the delicate glass figurine. I was the reliable shelf holding her up. And whenever I dared question why my needs seemed optional, Mom turned it back on me with a cutting mix of scolding and shame. "Honestly, Claire, how can you begrudge your little sister? What kind of person gets jealous over silly things?" After a while, I learned to stop asking. I learned to swallow questions before they reached my tongue, learned to congratulate Olivia even when the celebration was built on a foundation of my own erasure. Because in our house, the fastest way to avoid conflict was simple: be silent, be useful, be invisible when necessary. That was the first real lesson of my childhood, not math or spelling or the state capitals, but this. If I wanted peace, I had to carry my own hurt quietly. If I wanted a place in that house, I had to earn it by not taking up space. If I wanted to avoid being painted as the problem, I had to make myself small enough to slip through the cracks. And the saddest part is that for years, I believed this was normal. I believed this was what families did: choose a favorite, assign a role, and hope the one expected to handle everything didn't crumble under the weight of being chronically overlooked. Looking back now, I can see how early the pattern was set, how clearly the roles were drawn before I even learned to read. Olivia was the golden child, the miracle, the princess, the one whose tears triggered emergency family meetings. I was the daughter who became the solution to household inconveniences, the buffer in every argument, the name Mom called first when she needed help, but last when she felt proud. And the more I accepted that fate, the more invisible I became, until even I started believing I wasn't meant to be seen at all. But silence has a way of storing itself. Every swallowed feeling becomes a pebble in your pocket, and one day, without realizing it, you're carrying an entire mountain. By the time I reached my teenage years, the hierarchy in our household wasn't just implied, it was institutional. Olivia's life was a season that everyone in the family revolved around, while mine was an afterthought penciled into the margins. I remember being 17, staring at myself in the mirror in a cheap prom dress I had ordered online after weeks of saving tips from my part-time job at a local bakery. It arrived wrinkled and a shade duller than advertised, but it was all I had. That same afternoon, Mom had driven Olivia, then only 14, to a boutique across town so she could try on prom styles early and learn what silhouettes suit her best. I waited for Mom to come home and say, "Let's go find your dress now," but she didn't. She walked through the door carrying garment bags for Olivia's choir recital, humming as if nothing had been missed. When I gently reminded her that my prom was in 3 days, she blinked in mild surprise and said, "Claire, I thought you were handling that on your own. You're so independent." And, just like that, the milestone that meant everything to me shrank into something disposable. I didn't cry. I ironed my dress myself, took a few selfies in my room, and rode to prom with a friend's older brother who had room in the car. If you'd told me then that the moment was a preview of everything that would come later, I would have thought you were being dramatic. But you would have been right. My high school graduation followed the same blueprint. I graduated in the top 10 of my class, an achievement that would have earned Olivia a dedicated banner, printed programs, and Mom's tears of joy. For me, it was simply Claire doing what Claire always does, no big deal. Dad and Mom arrived 20 minutes late, slipping into the bleachers halfway through the ceremony. I spotted them only because Dad waved vaguely when he realized I was scanning the crowd. When the ceremony ended, families poured onto the field, hugging their kids, taking pictures with grandparents, and handing bouquets of flowers to daughters who had studied half as hard as I had. My parents walked toward me, said a quick, "Congratulations," and then immediately turned to Olivia, who was fanning herself dramatically and whining about how hot and crowded it was. Within 5 minutes, Mom announced we needed to leave. "Olivia's overheating," she insisted, as though I were a bystander and not the graduate. We left without photos, without a dinner, without a moment that felt like a moment. That should have been the first crack in the facade, the moment something inside me snapped and said, "You deserve better than this." But I swallowed it, just like I swallowed everything else then. I kept telling myself, "Mom's stressed. Mom's distracted. Mom's tired." I excused behavior that would later become impossible to ignore. And then came Olivia's graduation 4 years later, an event so lavish it felt like stepping into someone else's movie. Mom transformed our backyard into something resembling a wedding venue. White tents, fairy lights, a rented sound system, and a small stage where Olivia stood glowing in her cap and gown while the pastor delivered a personalized blessing. A banner hung across the fence, our star in glittery gold letters. Tables were lined with catered food, floral centerpieces, and framed photos of Olivia from babyhood to senior year. Everyone from church came. Neighbors came. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in a decade came. I was there too, standing off to the side with a paper plate of pasta salad, smiling politely at people who asked, "And what are you doing these days, dear?" As if I hadn't already graduated with honors years before. My achievements were invisible here. They dissolved in the glow surrounding Olivia. The bizarre thing is that at the time, I still didn't let myself be angry. I kept rewriting the story to protect myself from the truth. Mom's just proud of Olivia. Mom didn't mean to overlook my big days. Mom's doing her best. But cracks have a way of spreading when you ignore them. That night, as music played and Olivia basked in the spotlight, I caught myself wondering when I had last felt seen, not praised extravagantly, not celebrated excessively, just simply noticed. College was the first time I saw the world beyond my family's orbit, and yet it was also the first time I felt the full weight of everything I'd been conditioned to accept. I chose accounting and risk management because it felt solid, predictable, something no one could argue with, something that would guarantee me a future I could stand on without asking anyone for permission or support. But choosing a practical major didn't magically conjure the money to pay for it. I worked the breakfast shift at a campus cafe, hauling myself out of bed at 4:45 a.m. to flip pancakes and refill coffee cups before rushing to lectures. When other students talked about weekend trips, football games, or parties, I knew the inside of a grease trap better than any frat house. My student loans climbed until they hit $40,000, and even then I kept telling myself I was lucky, because at least I was doing it on my own. At least I wasn't a burden. At least no one could say I hadn't earned my place. Meanwhile, Olivia floated through her own college years on a cloud of fully funded comfort. My parents enrolled her in a private liberal arts school 3 states away, tuition, apartment, meal plans, and even her monthly creative allowance, all paid in full. Mom bragged constantly about it, how Olivia belonged in an environment that nurtured artists, how she needed space to become who she truly is. I remember overhearing her tell a neighbor, Claire always wanted to do things independently, so we respected that. Olivia needs more support. It stunned me how easily my sacrifices had been rewritten into choices, how conveniently my lack of help had been transformed into a narrative of independence. In truth, I hadn't chosen self-sufficiency. I'd simply been denied any alternative. But when you grow up as the strong one, no one ever asks whether you actually want to be strong. One Thanksgiving during my sophomore year, I remember standing behind the cafe counter in my apron, handing out to-go turkey sandwiches to drunk college kids while the rest of campus emptied out. My manager had offered double pay for the holiday shift, and I took it without hesitation because rent was due the following week. My phone buzzed during my break with a photo Mom had sent, Olivia posing in front of the Rockefeller Center tree in New York, wrapped in a stylish coat I knew she didn't buy with her own money. The caption read, "Our girl chasing inspiration." I slid my phone back into my apron pocket before the ache in my chest could settle. That night, after we closed the cafe, I walked back to my dorm under a sky so quiet it felt hollow. I heated a $1 frozen meal, sat cross-legged on my narrow bed, and told myself it was temporary, that someday I'd look back and see all this as character building. But the truth was simpler. I was exhausted, alone, and trying desperately to pretend it didn't matter. It was around that time I visited the campus counseling center for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. I thought I was just tired, stressed, stretched too thin. But after listening to me talk about my family, about the room assignments, the birthdays, the graduations, the funding disparities, my therapist paused, set her notepad down, and asked gently, "Has anyone ever talked to you about family roles? About scapegoat children and golden children?" The words sounded clinical, almost absurd, but something about them made my throat tighten. She explained the dynamic. How some families unconsciously assign one child the role of the shining symbol of the parent's worth, while another becomes the repository for frustration, blame, and emotional neglect. She said, "Claire, it sounds like you were expected to be self-sufficient, so your parents could pour their attention into Olivia without feeling guilty. That doesn't make you stronger, it makes you overlooked." I didn't break down or cry, not then. I just sat very still while something inside me shifted. It was like hearing the diagnosis for an illness you didn't know you had, but that had shaped every part of you. I finally had language for the quiet erosion that had been happening my whole life. But even with this new awareness, I wasn't ready to pull away from my family. The bar for affection from them was so low that I clung to whatever crumbs were available. I kept answering the texts, kept going home for holidays when I could afford the gas, kept pretending their small gestures meant more than they did. I told myself I didn't need fairness, just proximity. Just inclusion. Just enough warmth to convince me I still belong somewhere. By the time I turned 31, the shape of my life looked nothing like the one my parents used to predict for me. I had carved out a quiet, deliberate existence in Atlanta, a job I was good at, a salary that allowed me to breathe for the first time, and an apartment with tall windows that poured sunlight across hardwood floors every morning. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Every inch of it earned through years of discipline and the sort of resilience that becomes second nature to kids who grow up raising themselves emotionally. My days settled into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Early workouts, long hours analyzing financial risk models, and evenings spent cooking simple meals while jazz played softly in the background. I had built a life in which I finally felt real, visible, and whole. I also had people who chose me with intention, something I didn't realize I'd been starving for until it arrived. Jasmine, my closest friend from college, had become a successful attorney and the kind of woman who could switch from arguing a case to comforting you with a gallon of ice cream without missing a beat. She had seen the cracks in my family dynamic long before I could name them, and she never once shamed me for still craving their approval. Then there was Ethan, steady, thoughtful Ethan, a structural engineer who worked on high-rise projects and lived like the human embodiment of calm. He never pushed me to talk about my family, but when I did, he listened with a patience that felt so new it sometimes scared me. Being with him made me realize how low the bar had always been for what I considered love. Despite having this new stability, the gravitational pull of family remained. A week before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with the group text my mother sent every year, a list of dishes assigned to each person, as if we were all employees contributing to a potluck for the company she ran. My name, as usual, was attached to the most time-consuming items: sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, pecan pie, 3 dishes, while Olivia was assigned appetizer with no specifics. Beneath the list was a second message. We also need to talk about Olivia's future. Some exciting things coming up. That was Mom's way of saying, we have plans for her, and we expect you to contribute. There was never an explicit ask, just expectation wrapped in cheerful punctuation. Normally, I would have let the messages chip away at my chest for a few hours before giving in, showing up with dishes made from scratch like a dutiful daughter who still believed effort could buy love. But this year, something was different. Maybe it was the way my life finally felt stable. Maybe it was the exhaustion of years spent bending myself into shapes that never earned gratitude. Or maybe I sensed somewhere deep in the part of me that remembered every childhood slight that this Thanksgiving would require more of me than emotional management. 2 days before the holiday, I went to my therapy session, the same Thursday morning slot I'd held for nearly 5 years. My therapist, Dr. Patel, listened as I described the texts the requests disguised as obligations. The looming conversation about Olivia's future, the tightening in my chest when I thought about walking back into that house. After a long moment, she leaned back in her chair and asked, "If they cross your boundaries again, Claire, are you prepared to stand up and leave? Not emotionally leave. Physically leave?" Her question hung in the air, heavier than anything she had asked me before. For most of my life, I had been the girl who stayed. Stayed through the favoritism, stayed through the neglect, stayed hoping for scraps of affection. Leaving felt like betrayal, not of them, but of the version of myself who had survived by being pliant. I sat there breathing shallowly, feeling the familiar tug of war inside me. And then, to my own surprise, I heard myself say, "Yes. This time, yes." The words didn't feel brave or dramatic, they felt like truth. Like stepping into my real life instead of the shadow I'd been walking in for years. Dr. Patel nodded gently, as if she had been waiting for that moment to arrive. "Then trust yourself," she said. "And, remember, protecting your peace is not cruelty." I walked out of her office into the crisp November air with a strange clarity humming in my bones. I didn't know exactly what would happen at Thanksgiving, but for the first time, I wasn't going in hoping for love. I was going in armed with boundaries. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous thing my family had ever seen from me. Thanksgiving night always had a script in my family, and for the first hour it unfolded exactly the way it always did. The house smelled like rosemary, butter, and roasted turkey. The kind of warmth that tricks you into believing everything is normal. Olivia floated around in a cream sweater dress, radiant and delicate as ever, accepting compliments from relatives like gifts she was entitled to. Dad carved the turkey with exaggerated importance, and Mom moved from place to place with a hostess's pride, brushing non-existent crumbs off the tablecloth and adjusting candles that didn't need adjusting. I sat quietly at the end of the table, between two distant cousins who barely remembered my name, trying to remind myself that I was here by choice, that I had boundaries now, agency now, a life outside these walls now. Dinner began harmlessly enough. Small talk. Compliments on the food. Questions about work that I answered politely but vaguely. Then, somewhere between passing the cranberry sauce and refilling water glasses, Mom cleared her throat. It wasn't loud, but the room shifted instantly toward her, everyone unconsciously responding to the gravitational pull she had always wielded. She folded her napkin with performative care, looked down the table at me, and said, "We have something important to discuss tonight. Something about Olivia's future." Her smile tightened the air like a wire. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. Mom continued. "Olivia and Brandon found a townhouse they want to buy before the wedding. It's perfect, beautiful, safe, great neighborhood, but they can't secure the mortgage alone yet." She paused dramatically, the way she always did when delivering a verdict she expected unanimous approval for. "So your father and I thought it would make sense for you to co-sign on the house, just until they're more established." The room didn't go silent, it went expectant. As if everyone was waiting for me to nod obediently, grateful to be included, grateful to be useful. It wasn't even framed as an ask. It was an assignment. And they expected me to step into the role I'd played my entire life, the strong one, the dependable one, the daughter who didn't need celebrating but could always be counted on to clean up everyone else's mess. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, but this time I didn't fold around it. I set my fork down and said, evenly, "No. I'm not co-signing anything." Mom blinked slowly, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "Claire, this is for your sister. For her future." "I understand," I said. "But the answer is still no." Dad cleared his throat, leaning forward with the voice he used when pretending to be calm. "It's not a big risk for you, sweetheart. You have stable income, strong credit. It just makes sense." "It makes sense for Olivia," I said. "Not for me." Mom's composure cracked first. Her jaw tightened, her voice rising half an octave. "You're being selfish." I breathed in carefully. "I'm setting a boundary." That single word boundary must have felt like an attack. Mom pushed her chair back slightly, eyes narrowing. "You come into this house, eat our food, enjoy our holiday, and you can't even do one thing for your sister? After everything we've done for you?" Something inside me snapped into place, not breaking, but aligning. "What you've done for me?" I asked softly. "Mom, I put myself through college. I paid my own loans. I built my life without asking you for anything. Ever." A murmur rippled through the table. But Mom wasn't finished. She stood up, pointing at me the way she used to when scolding me as a child. "You don't know how good you've had it, Claire. If we focused more on Olivia, it's because she deserved it. She's always been the one with potential. The one who could shine." "And I was what?" I asked. "The one who could handle being ignored?" "You're ungrateful," she spat. "And cruel. Olivia deserves to live well. She deserves to have support. You? You've always acted like you didn't need anything." "For the record," I said quietly, acting like I didn't need anything was the only way to survive in this family. The room froze. You could feel everyone holding their breath. And then Mom lost whatever thin thread of control she had left. Her face twisted with a fury so old it felt rehearsed. She slammed her palm onto the table and screamed, "I wish you were never born." There it was. The truth she'd been skirting my entire life. Spoken plainly at last. The words landed with the force of a lifetime, every overlooked birthday, every ignored achievement, every time I'd been told to handle it echoing inside them. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and looked her in the eyes with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "Then consider me dead." Gasps fluttered around the table. Olivia pressed her hand to her chest. Dad muttered something like, "My name, soft and useless." But I was already stepping away from the chair, from the table, from the entire architecture of dysfunction I had lived under for 3 decades. The front door was only 20 feet away, but walking toward it felt like crossing an ocean. When I opened it, the cold night air rushed against my face, sharp, honest, freeing. I stepped outside without looking back, my breath ghosting in the November darkness, and for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't running away. I was walking toward myself. The week after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet, almost suspended, like the moment after a storm when the air is still deciding whether to break into sunlight or unleash another downpour. The silence wasn't accidental, it was engineered. The minute I got into my car that night, hands trembling on the steering wheel, I blocked every number in my family group thread. Then I blocked my mother individually, then my father, then Olivia. It wasn't anger that pushed my fingers across the screen, it was self-preservation. I knew if I saw even one guilt-soaked message, even one manipulative plea, even one accusation masquerading as concern, I would crumble under the weight of old patterns. Blocking them was the first act of defiance in my adult life that felt like choosing myself. For exactly 12 hours, there was silence. Then the machine began. I didn't hear it directly, my phone stayed blissfully still, but the chaos found its ways through other channels. My cousin Lydia texted from an unknown number. "Are you okay? Your mom is saying you had some kind of emotional episode at dinner." A coworker pulled me aside at the office and whispered, "Your mom called my mom asking if anyone knows what's going on with you." Even Jasmine called me in a low, cautious voice. "Claire, your mother has been calling relatives nonstop. She says you're unstable," and ran out of the house screaming. Screaming. I laughed when Jasmine said it, not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity of the rewrite was almost impressive. My mother didn't just distort narratives, she professionally curated them. And she knew how to pick her audience: elderly aunts who worshipped her hospitality, church women who believed martyrdom was next to godliness, neighbors who had only ever seen her performing kindness on front porches. Within days, a whole mythology had formed around me. I had snapped. I was emotionally volatile. I needed prayer, support, and patience. The irony was almost poetic. The child who survived by staying silent was now being painted as hysterical for finally speaking. Then came Monday morning. I arrived at work early, craving the normalcy of spreadsheets and risk models, only to be met by an unread email flagged urgent. It was from HR. My stomach sank as I clicked it open. The email said, "Hi Claire, your mother called the office multiple times this morning, requesting to speak with your supervisor about your mental state. She shared personal information and expressed concern for your stability. Please stop by HR today so we can document and support appropriately." Heat pulsed behind my eyes, not tears, but fury, clean and sharp. My mother had crossed the one line I thought even she wouldn't dare approach: my professional life. My job was the one domain untouched by her entitlement, the one identity I had built without interference. And yet here she was, trying to fracture it, too. When I walked into the HR office, I expected skepticism, judgment, maybe even suspicion. Instead, my director, Amanda, looked at me calmly and said, "You don't owe us details. But we need you to know we won't allow anyone to jeopardize your safety or reputation here." She explained she had already informed security, instructed reception not to transfer calls from anyone claiming to be family, and filed a note indicating that any future calls would be treated as harassment. For the first time in days, my chest loosened. Someone believed me. More than that, someone protected me. Still, the fallout continued to spill into my peripheral life. My mother must have spent every waking hour dialing numbers like it was her new occupation. The pastor from the church we attended when I was a child left a voicemail on my work line saying, "Claire, your mother is deeply worried. She says you're withdrawing and pushing everyone away. Please reach out so we can pray over you." A neighbor from my parents' street sent an email to the generic company address because my mother couldn't reach me elsewhere. It was absurd. It was invasive. It was predictable. My mother didn't know how to be powerless, so she grabbed for control in the only way she knew, by shaping a narrative before I had a chance to speak for myself. She wasn't trying to reach me, she was trying to reach everyone around me. And she was terrified that the truth that I had walked away by choice would weaken the pedestal she had built for Olivia and crumble the illusion of the perfect family she paraded around the church. That afternoon, after one more forwarded message from security about a Linda Thompson attempting to leave a package at the front desk, I sat at my desk and drafted the simplest, most liberating email of my adult life. Subject: Family Contact and Security Protocol. Hi Amanda and security team. Effective immediately, I am requesting that no family member be permitted to contact me through workplace channels, by phone, email, or in person. This includes, but is not limited to, Linda and Mark Thompson. Please treat all attempts as unauthorized and notify me only if legally required. Thank you for safeguarding the boundaries I am setting for my personal safety and emotional well-being. Claire. When I hit send, a quiet settled over me, not relief exactly, but something sturdier. A line had been drawn. A barrier erected. For the first time, my mother's voice. Her reach, her chaos, couldn't follow me into every corner of my life. This was the first real boundary I had ever enforced, and I expected it to feel like loss. Instead, it felt like oxygen. Chaos didn't arrive all at once. It leaked, quietly at first, like a hairline crack in a dam small enough to ignore, then impossible to contain. The first fracture came from an unexpected direction: Olivia's future in-laws. Her fiancé, Daniel, came from a polished, old Atlanta family known for their manners, their money, and their obsession with appearances. They prided themselves on being involved, which really meant they conducted discreet background checks on anyone who entered their bloodline. So when Linda told them I had lost control mentally and run from the Thanksgiving table in hysterics, they didn't simply nod and accept it, they verified. It started innocently. Daniel's mother, Mrs. Harrison, found my LinkedIn. She saw the clean, steady career progression. Senior risk analyst. Professional certifications. Public speaking engagements. A resume that practically radiated stability and competence. Not exactly the profile of someone in psychological freefall. So she reached out to one of her neighbors, who happened to work in compliance with my company. He gave her a polite but definitive answer: Claire is one of the most reliable analysts we have. No issues of instability whatsoever. That's when suspicion took root. The Harrisons asked subtle, casual questions at a charity dinner. Oh, you know the Thompsons, right? How are the daughters? We've heard concerns. Atlanta is a city built on gossip, passed over polished wine glasses, and once a question is released into the air, it grows teeth. People who had attended high school with Olivia and me began sharing old stories, small things but consistent. How Olivia always had the new clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. How Olivia's dance recitals were treated like royal coronations while my debate trophies were stacked on a laundry shelf. How teachers whispered that I was the quiet, responsible one, and Olivia was the delicate one whose parents expected everyone to bend around her feelings. Then someone nobody knows who mentioned what happened at Thanksgiving. Not the lie. The truth. The actual sentence. The phrase that had sliced me open and ended the last 30 years of denial in one blow. Linda said to Claire, "I wish you were never born." In front of the whole family. That sentence traveled through the community like wildfire. It hit the Harrisons, and the reaction was immediate. Shock. Disgust. Quiet, horrified whispers. Because, in their world, you can make many mistakes, but publicly wishing your child had never existed? That was a stain no amount of money or Southern charm could bleach clean. Within a week, Daniel's parents sat Olivia down for a conversation. They weren't canceling the wedding yet, but they wanted clarity about the family dynamic. Olivia, who had grown up in a bubble of unconditional indulgence, had never been interrogated before. She panicked. She blamed me. She blamed stress. She blamed misunderstandings. But the Harrisons didn't accept abstract excuses. They wanted facts. Why had her mother said something so cruel? Why had I cut contact so completely? Why had their quiet investigation uncovered a lifetime of inequity? Why, if I was so unstable, did every reference confirm the opposite? Olivia couldn't answer any of it. And suddenly, The wedding, her dream spectacle with a vineyard setting and a 12-piece string ensemble, was no longer guaranteed. Meanwhile, the church community Linda worshipped for social validation began pulling away. The pastor, a calm, gray-haired man who had baptized both Olivia and me as children, requested a private meeting. He'd heard the rumors, the sentence, the fallout. He asked Linda to explain, to reflect, to acknowledge even the possibility of wrongdoing. Linda, incapable of self-examination, stormed out halfway through. And when people at church began softly, cautiously, lovingly challenging her narrative, she didn't stay to defend herself. She quit. 20 years of community gone in one dramatic exit. The unraveling didn't stop there. At a family reunion 2 weekends later, one of my older aunts, Aunt Gloria, who had always watched the family dynamics with sad, quiet eyes, finally spoke aloud what everyone else had tiptoed around. Linda made some dramatic, teary speech about how Claire abandoned the family, and Claire fell into sinful pride, hoping for sympathy. Instead, Gloria set down her fork, folded her hands, and said, clear enough for the entire room to hear, "Linda, you treated that girl like a burden for 20 years. We all saw it." Time froze. Forks hovered above plates. Olivia's future mother-in-law blinked in disbelief. And Linda's face flushed a shade of red I had never seen before. Humiliation, rage, and fear collided all at once. She sputtered, tried to deny it, tried to reassert her narrative. But it was too late. The truth had been named. Out loud. Publicly. And once the truth takes form, it can't be shoved back into the dark. From there, the social collapse was swift. Neighbors stopped asking Linda for favors or advice. Friends who once adored her Southern hostess persona suddenly had other commitments. Even the book club she dominated with iron-fisted niceness suggested taking a break. It wasn't punishment, it was consequence. And all the while, I stayed silent. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct the lies. I simply vanished and let the truth breathe on its own. Without me feeding or fighting it, the narrative balanced itself naturally. Because when manipulators lose access to their scapegoat, their stories start collapsing under their own weight. By the end of month 2, my mother wasn't just losing control of the narrative, she was losing her audience. And for someone who survived on image, admiration, and performative motherhood, that was the deepest wound of all. Chaos hadn't erupted because I fought back. It erupted because I stopped. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Slipped under my apartment door, as if it were something fragile that might break under the weight of a normal delivery. I recognized the handwriting instantly, wide loops, sharp angles, each letter pressed too hard into the paper, as though force could make a lie look like truth. My mother always wrote like she lived, performatively, dramatically, without room for correction. I stared at the envelope for a long minute, not because I was afraid of its contents, but because I already knew what would be inside. Narcissistic apologies all come wrapped the same way: 3 parts justification, 1 part martyrdom, and a teaspoon of "I'm sorry you feel hurt" sprinkled on top. Still, curiosity and closure can feel similar, so I opened it. 3 pages. 3 full, handwritten pages. The first was a defense, a treatise on her intentions and sacrifices. She wrote about how she had always tried to meet the unique needs of each daughter, how Olivia required more support because of her sensitive disposition, and how I had always been strong-willed, independent, difficult to reach emotionally. She painted herself as a misunderstood mother doing her best with 2 wildly different children. Not once did she mention the words fairness, compassion, or accountability. The closest she got was, "I'm sorry you feel hurt about the way things unfolded." Not "I'm sorry I hurt you." Not "I'm sorry for what I said." The apology was shaped like a mirror pointed at me, as though the injury came from my perception, not her actions. The second page attempted justification. She wrote about the Thanksgiving dinner as if it had spiraled out of her control, as if my refusal to co-sign a mortgage for Olivia had been an act of deep betrayal. She listed all the ways she felt attacked, how my boundary had made her feel like a failure, how the pressure of hosting had triggered emotional dysregulation. A phrase she had clearly picked up from some self-help reel, and used with the confidence of someone who had never set foot in a therapist's office. By the third page, she finally touched the sentence, the one that detonated everything. I wish you were never born. She explained it away as a heat of the moment lash out, a regrettable emotional outburst that did not reflect her true feelings. But she couldn't bring herself to write the simple truth. That she had chosen those words. That she had meant them long before she spoke them, that she had used them to wound. There was no real remorse, only regret that the consequences had spiraled beyond her control. The letter ended with a gentle but unmistakable ask, "It's time for us to move past this. Family is too important to throw away." I folded the letter in half, then into quarters, placed it back into the envelope, and put it in a drawer not as keepsake, but as evidence. And then I went on with my day. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't respond. I simply refused the invitation back into the cycle. The silence I sent in return was the first real truth I had ever given my mother. A week later, something I did not expect happened. Olivia reached out not through a blocked number loophole, not through manipulation by proxy, but through a short, hesitant message from an unknown number. "Claire, it's Olivia. I'm in therapy. Can we talk?" My first instinct was suspicion. Olivia had always been the golden child, the one cushioned from consequences. The one who thought love was something that arrived pre-wrapped with bows and applause. But something in the message, its simplicity, its lack of entitlement, made me pause. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop near Piedmont Park. When she walked in, she looked different. Not physically, but softened. Deflated in a way that suggested her world had cracked open, and she was finally seeing through the light pouring in. She didn't waste time. "My therapist asked me to list every memory I have where you supported me, and every memory where I supported you." She swallowed. I couldn't think of a single example for the second list. Her eyes filled. "I didn't realize how much was handed to me. I didn't realize how much they expected you to carry alone." I listened quietly. Not because I was cold, but because this was the first time in my life Olivia was speaking without a script written by our mother. She talked about how Daniel's parents had questioned her, how therapy had forced her to sit with the discomfort of privilege she never earned, how she was beginning to see that being adored and being loved were not the same thing. She apologized not for what happened at Thanksgiving, not for the wedding drama, but for years, for childhood, for being blind to what was obvious to everyone else, and it wasn't a performance. Olivia was finally learning to see herself without the mirror our mother held up to her. I accepted her apology, not with dramatic forgiveness, not with a sweeping reunion, but with steady, cautious honesty. "I'm glad you're growing," I said. "But that doesn't mean we go back to the way things were." She nodded, eyes still wet. "I know. I'm not asking for that, I'm just sorry." Then, another surprise. My father, Mark, emailed me. No flowery handwriting, no dramatics, no twisting of language. Just a clean, painfully honest message. He admitted he had failed me. He admitted he had stood on the sidelines. He admitted he had watched the imbalance and done nothing because keeping the peace with your mother felt easier than protecting you. He wrote about regret, not performance regret, but the hollowed-out, late-in-life kind that sits in a man's chest like a stone. "I don't expect forgiveness," he ended. "But I want to be someone you could respect someday. I'm willing to do the work." And strangely, I believed him. Not enough to invite him back into my life fully, but enough to see him not as an accomplice, but as someone who had betrayed himself long before he betrayed me. But even with Olivia's growth and my father's honesty, I held my boundaries. I didn't return home. I didn't reopen the group chat. I didn't attend family functions or step back into the role they built for me. I forgave the human beings they were becoming, but I refused to resurrect the family system that broke me. Forgiveness is not the same as restoration. And I was finally choosing the difference. A year can pass without feeling like change has happened, or it can reshape a life so fully that when you look back, the person you once were feels like a distant relative. For me, the 12 months after that Thanksgiving cracked open a version of myself I didn't even realize was waiting to breathe. My new apartment sunlit, plant-filled, quiet in a way childhood homes rarely are became the first place I'd ever lived that felt entirely mine. Morning light spilled across warm wooden floors, casting slow-moving patterns from the leaves of my fiddle-leaf fig. I'd never been a plant person before, but something about caring for things that didn't take from me felt sacred. Peace lived in small rituals now, watering herbs on the kitchen sill, reading on the balcony with a wool blanket, lighting a cinnamon candle that made the whole space smell like the holiday I never had. Work shifted too. After months of consistency, clarity, and boundaries, my director approached me with a promotion, Senior Risk Analyst Lead. "You've become a stabilizing force on the team," she told me. Hearing the words felt almost surreal. For years, my mother had insisted I was too emotional, too reactive, too sensitive, but in the real world, the world not built on her insecurities, I was steady, strong, reliable. My colleagues trusted me. My boundaries didn't make me difficult. They made me respected. Jasmine celebrated by taking me out for tapas. Ethan brought champagne and a bouquet of sunflowers. For the first time, I wasn't the afterthought. I was the one people showed up for. It was during one of those sun-soaked mornings, curled on the couch in socks Ethan claimed were illegal levels of cozy, that the idea struck me. I want a Friendsgiving. Not just a dinner. Not just a gathering. A reimagining of what Thanksgiving could look like without the rot of performance and obligation. A table for people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or simply alone. People who deserved warmth without earning it first. The guest list formed itself naturally. There was Maya, the new intern from Oregon, only 22, spending her first holiday season away from home. She mentioned quietly in the break room that flights were too expensive. She tried to make it sound matter of fact, but the loneliness slipped through her voice like smoke. There was Cole, a coworker in logistics. He was going through a brutal divorce, the kind that split holidays in half and left both halves feeling incomplete. His son was spending Thanksgiving with his ex's family that year, and he'd resigned himself to microwaving a frozen dinner alone. There was Mrs. Ramirez, my 70-year-old neighbor, who had lived 2 doors down since the building was constructed in the 90s. Her children lived across the country and visited once every 3 years. She always smiled when she saw me, always said, "Mija, you brighten the hallway." But there was a softness in her eyes that hinted at quiet evenings and long winters. There was also Anthony, the delivery driver who handled half the shipments for my building. We talked often enough for me to learn he worked the holidays every year because it earned extra pay and kept him from sitting alone in a studio that never felt like home. And of course, there were my constants, Jasmine, with her dry humor and fierce loyalty. Ethan, who had become the most grounding presence in my life. 2 coworkers I genuinely enjoyed, a friend from my book club. Small threads of connection that felt more like chosen family than anything I'd grown up with. I wanted the night to feel like something warm people could step into, the opposite of the cold, brittle Thanksgivings of my childhood. So, I decorated the apartment with intention. Soft string lights draped around the window frames, clusters of candles in amber glass, a simmer pot of orange slices, cloves, and cinnamon sticks filling the air with sweetness. I set one long wooden table down the center of the living room rented, because mine was too small, and covered it with a linen runner, mismatched plates I'd collected from thrift shops, and small handwritten place cards. Each card carried the same message: no perfect families needed. Just come as you are. When the doorbell rang that evening, I felt something open inside me. Maya arrived first, holding a pie she'd clearly baked in a tiny apartment oven, its crust slightly uneven but made with care. Her eyes widened at the decorations. "I've never been to something like this," she whispered. Then Cole, carrying a bottle of wine and trying hard not to show how relieved he was to have somewhere anywhere to belong. Mrs. Ramirez brought homemade tamales wrapped in warm towels, and when Anthony walked in, he laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "I haven't had a real Thanksgiving dinner since I was a kid," he said. People settled naturally, folding into the space as though it had been waiting for them. Conversations sparked and crossed, strangers becoming not strangers, within minutes. There was laughter, the real kind that fills a room from the floorboards up. There was quiet, too, the comfortable kind that happens when people feel safe enough not to perform. At one point, I stepped back into the hallway to breathe it in. The glow of the lights, the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, the smell of cinnamon and roasted vegetables. And the feeling gentle, expanding. Undeniable that I had created something my younger self had needed desperately. A table where she would have been welcomed, not tolerated. A room where she didn't have to earn her right to be loved. For the first time in my life, Thanksgiving felt like gratitude instead of survival. And I understood, in a way I never had before, that healing doesn't come from being invited back into the places that hurt you. It comes from building new spaces where you finally feel whole. The night unfolded slowly, like a warm quilt being pulled over a room full of people who had forgotten what it felt like to be held by a sense of belonging. The candles flickered against the windows, casting soft halos around the faces gathered at my table. Laughter real, unrestrained, rising from somewhere deep and unguarded bounced gently off the walls. The kind of laughter that fills the space beneath your ribs and reminds you that being alive can feel good, even tender. Platters moved from hand to hand with a kind of communal choreography: roasted vegetables glazed with honey, sweet potato mash dusted with cinnamon, turkey carved by Ethan with exaggerated pride, tamales from Mrs. Ramirez still steaming through their blankets, a pie from Maya whose crust cracked but tasted of home. No one apologized for imperfections, no one compared dishes. No one kept score. Everything was simply offered, accepted, and enjoyed. Small conversations drifted across the table like soft music. Cole told Jasmine about his son's latest Lego obsession. Mrs. Ramirez coached Anthony on how to keep herbs alive in a windowsill planter. Maya asked Ethan whether Atlanta always smelled like pine in November or if she was imagining it. The intimacy wasn't forced, it was born naturally out of people finally exhaling. People realizing this was a room where they didn't need to shrink to fit. When the plates emptied and the room settled into a comfortable hum, I caught everyone's attention with a gentle tap of my glass. Before dessert, I said, I thought we might each share one thing we're grateful for this year. Nothing big unless you want it to be. There was a moment of silence, not awkward, just thoughtful, before Maya lifted her hand shyly. I guess I'm thankful because tonight I'm not eating instant noodles alone in my dorm, she said with a small laugh. I know I'm just an intern, but this made me feel like someone saw me. Her eyes shimmered in the candlelight, and I felt something uncoil inside my chest. Next to her, Anthony cleared his throat and rubbed the back of his neck. I'm grateful, 'cause someone remembered I exist, he said bluntly. But his voice softened on the last word. I work holidays every year. Nobody's ever saved me a seat. The table quieted. Not from sadness, but from recognition. We knew what it felt like to be overlooked. To be a shadow passing through rooms where no one looked up. Mrs. Ramirez spoke next, her hands folded delicately in her lap. 10 years, she said softly. That's how long it's been since anyone invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. My children mean well, but they're far, and life gets busy. Tonight reminded me that I am still part of the world. She lifted her glass toward me. Thank you, Querida. It honestament. Cole stared at his plate for a long moment before meeting my eyes. This year was rough, he began. I thought I'd be spending today alone, pretending it didn't matter. But sitting here, hearing all of you talk, laughing with people who didn't even know me a month ago, it mattered. More than I expected. A gentle quiet washed over the room. The kind that feels like shared understanding rather than absence of sound. I looked around at the young intern with hope flickering behind tired eyes, the driver who had spent years delivering packages to families he never joined for dinner, the neighbor who had lived through a decade of solitary holidays, the coworker rebuilding a life, my best friend, my partner. People who were not bound to me by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by presence, by the simple miracle of showing up. Something loosened in me. Something I had carried since childhood, an old belief that families were built from birth certificates, DNA, and obligation. But this table, this warmth, this chorus of mismatched voices coming together felt truer than anything I had been handed at birth. I stood, letting my gaze travel slowly across every face. I want to say something, I began, but my voice caught unexpectedly. I cleared my throat, smiled through the crack forming in my composure. Growing up, I thought family was something you were assigned, something fixed, something you had to endure, no matter how small it made you feel. But this past year taught me something I wish I had learned sooner. The room waited, quiet and attentive. Not everyone who brings you into this world is meant to walk through it with you, I said. Family isn't the people who share your name. Family is the people who choose you. The people who don't ask you to shrink. The people who don't punish you for existing. Maya wiped her cheek. Mrs. Ramirez clutched her napkin. Cole looked down, blinking hard. I continued, letting the truth settle onto the table, like a soft blanket. Family is the people sitting at your table because they want to be here, not because they expect something from you. And it is never the people who wish you didn't exist. A breath, steady and full. So tonight, I'm grateful for this. For all of you. For a room full of people who prove that we get to create our own families, one seat at a time. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was fullness. It was the sound of a dozen hearts realizing they had, in some small way, been claimed not out of duty, but out of recognition. Then Ethan raised his glass. To chosen families, he said simply. Everyone lifted theirs. A soft clinking filled the room like a blessing. And just like that, Friendsgiving became something bigger than a dinner, something sacred. A sanctuary built from mismatched chairs, imperfect pies, tamales wrapped with love, string lights glowing like tiny stars, and a group of people who had all, at some point, lived through the ache of feeling unwanted. A home for the overlooked, the lonely, the displaced. A home I built not to replace what I lost, but to honor what I finally found. By December, the city had settled into that quiet winter rhythm, soft gray skies, bare branches tracing delicate lines across the air. People wrapped in scarves and moving a little slower, a little gentler. My apartment glowed with the remnants of Friendsgiving, a strand of lights I couldn't bring myself to take down, a leftover candle that still smelled faintly of cinnamon, a thank you card from Mrs. Ramirez taped to my fridge. Life felt steady. Not perfect. Not painless. But steady in a way I had never experienced growing up. And then, as the year folded in on itself, an email arrived. From Linda. My mother. The subject line was a single word, hope. The message inside was short, so unlike her dramatic 3-page letters that I read it twice just to be sure it was real. I heard you hosted a Thanksgiving this year. I hope you're well, Mom. There were no accusations. No manipulations. No demands to reconcile. No rehearsed justifications. Just a thin, brittle attempt at connection, or perhaps an attempt to soothe her own conscience. A year ago, that email would have sent me spiraling into confusion and guilt, wondering whether I owed her a reply, wondering whether silence made me cruel. Now, it barely stirred the air around me. I read it, I exhaled, and I closed my laptop without responding. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness. But because I no longer lived in the chapter where her approval or her remorse dictated my peace. Some bridges burn gently, with a soft hiss as they fade into ash. Others burn because you finally stop pouring water on them. I had built something new. She did not have access to it. Therapy remained a constant, no longer a space to survive, but a space to grow. My therapist, Dr. Kendall, once told me that healing from a toxic family is like learning a new language as an adult. Your tongue still remembers the old words, the old instincts, but your heart slowly memorizes more honest vocabulary. Boundaries. Worthiness. Choice. I began mentoring younger interns at work, especially the ones who confessed in quiet moments that their parents don't really believe in mental health, or expect too much, or don't understand boundaries. I recognized the tremor in their voices, the defensive humor, the practiced minimization. I knew those survival strategies intimately. So, I started small, inviting them to lunch, telling them that their exhaustion made sense, that their stories mattered, that adulthood didn't have to mean repeating what hurt them. I wasn't trying to become a savior. I was simply offering what I once needed: witness. Understanding. A person who didn't think you were dramatic for calling pain by its real name. The more I spoke, the more I realized how many people carried the same quiet ache I had grown up with. Children who had been the strong one, the independent one, the easy one, when what they really were was unattended. Children told they were resilient, when what they really were was alone. The world was full of us grown now, high-functioning, successful, and still learning how to unclench around love. My gratitude expanded with every passing month. Not gratitude for what happened to me, but gratitude for where it led me. The pain had been real, sharp, formative. But it wasn't the ending. It was the excavation that made room for something better, something chosen, something intentional. My home became a revolving door of borrowed families. Coworkers who had no siblings nearby, friends estranged from their parents, neighbors who longed for connection. We cooked together, shared stories, built tiny rituals that felt like stitching warmth back into the places where coldness once lived. And sometimes, late at night, I would stand by my window, watching the Atlanta skyline flicker with thousands of lives unfolding at once, and feel a quiet pride bloom in my chest. Not pride in surviving, but pride in choosing to live differently. In refusing to repeat what hurt me. In building the kind of life my younger self never dared to imagine. Linda's shadow still existed, but it no longer stretched across my days. It lived behind me, not before me. A closed door, a lesson. A life I stepped out of and would never step back into. If I ever crossed paths with her again, it would not be as the daughter she molded, the scapegoat she relied on, or the emotional punching bag she expected me to remain. It would be as the woman I chose to become. The woman who knew her worth. The woman who built family out of kindness instead of obligation. The woman who no longer needed permission to occupy space in her own story. When the year finally came to a close, I lit a single candle on my windowsill, golden, warm, steady. A small ritual for myself. A marker of the life I was choosing. The flame flickered gently, casting soft circles of light onto the glass, as though illuminating a version of me I had only just met. And as the clock ticked into the new year, I whispered the truth that had carried me this far, a truth I wanted etched into whatever came next. My mother once wished I had never been born. But I chose to be born again this time, into the life I deserve. This time, without her permission.